The Ghosts of the Blacktop by Arthur Finch. The sun over Route 66 that day was a malevolent eye, glaring down on a landscape bleached of color. Years have passed since then, a hazy stretch of time where the edges of memory blur, yet the oppressive heat and the shimmering desolation remain etched with unnerving clarity. I was chasing something then, a romantic notion of the open road, a foolish belief that the vast emptiness could somehow fill the hollow spaces within me. The old sedan, a faithful if temperamental companion, hummed a weary tune against the backdrop of silence, a silence broken only by the whisper of the wind carrying dust devils across the cracked asphalt. Even at the outset, there was a disquiet, a subtle discord beneath the surface of my supposed freedom. The air itself felt heavy, charged with an unseen weight. The familiar landmarks, the skeletal remains of gas stations, the boarded-up windows of forgotten motels seemed to possess a mournful quality, as if the ghosts of journeys past still clung to their decaying facades. The heat played tricks on my eyes, the horizon wavering, the road ahead seeming to stretch into an infinite, distorted expanse. It was a landscape that whispered of isolation, a place where the boundaries between reality and illusion felt perilously thin. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach, a premonition that this journey into history might lead me down a darker, more personal path. The monotony of the road began to work its insidious magic. Hours bled into one another, the sun a relentless tormentor. My thoughts, untethered and free-floating, began to conjure phantoms in the periphery of my vision. Fleeting shapes by the roadside, indistinct figures that vanished the moment I turned my head. Solitude, I was beginning to learn, was a double-edged sword, offering both liberation and a terrifying intimacy with the self. I'd chuckle nervously, a brittle sound swallowed by the vastness, trying to dismiss the growing dread as mere fatigue. But the feeling persisted, a cold finger tracing a line down my spine. The highway itself seemed to warp and shift, curves straightening, familiar signs replaced by fleeting glimpses of something else. The edges of my perception were fraying, the solid world around me becoming porous and unreliable. Then I saw them more clearly. Near the skeletal frame of an abandoned diner, translucent figures began to coalesce. Startled, I slammed on the brakes, the sudden silence amplifying the frantic thumping of my heart. I stepped out into the blast furnace of the desert air, the wind a hot, dry hand against my skin. "Hello?" My voice was thin and reedy, swallowed by the oppressive hush. The diner's broken windows stared back like vacant eyes, reflecting my own growing fear. A dark shimmer in the air beyond the shattered glass drew me closer, a distortion that hinted at something unseen, something just out of reach. But when I leaned closer, there was nothing. Only the faint, dusty scent of decay. Turning back to the car, a primal instinct to flee took hold. But as I stepped onto the blacktop, they were there again, the translucent figures now possessing a chilling familiarity. Faces from my past, their features etched with pain and regret. Friends lost to time, to distance, to my own failings. Their eyes held unspoken accusations. Their mouths moved silently, conveying messages that echoed the unspoken burdens I carried. Panic, cold and sharp, gripped me. Were these mere figments of a mind unraveling in the desolate heat, or were they something more insistent? I scrambled back into the car, fumbling with the locks, the setting sun casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. Focus on the road, I told myself, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Just keep driving. But the engine sputtered, the steering wheel felt heavy, resistant. As I pressed the accelerator, the world outside the windows twisted into a nightmarish montage. Fleeting images of accidents, screams caught on the wind, the phantom stain of blood on the cracked asphalt. The solitude had curdled into a suffocating paranoia. I fought against the encroaching fear, but with each blink the visions grew more vivid, more insistent. Then, a voice crackled from the radio, a low, sibilant whisper that cut through the oppressive silence. "Turn back, turn back," I shouted, a denial, a desperate plea to cling to some semblance of reality. But the landscape outside continued its grotesque transformation, the highway morphing into a churning vortex of despair. I saw them then, strewn across the phantom road, abandoned figures, their faces frozen in silent terror. Were they real? Or was my mind finally succumbing to the relentless pressure of the journey, the weight of my own unspoken regrets? The car lurched forward, the speedometer needle spinning wildly, time and space dissolving into a disorienting blur. Flashes of memory assaulted me. Childhood moments, pivotal choices, the stark reality of paths taken and not taken. Then darkness descended, the sun swallowed by an unseen eclipse, leaving me driving blind into an abyss of my own making. A presence loomed, a cold, hungry feeling in the air. A voice, raspy and close, whispered from the shadows, "You can't escape us." I willed myself to wake, to break free from the encroaching nightmare. The phantom highway dissolved, the screams of the fading figures echoing in the sudden silence. Their cries were a chorus of loss and regret, a haunting reminder of the connections severed, the words left unsaid. And then, just as suddenly, the familiar blacktop reappeared, stretching endlessly towards an unseen horizon. Daylight returned, stark and unforgiving, revealing me as the sole occupant of the car, the sole survivor of a journey into the darkest corners of my own mind. The truth, stark and undeniable, settled upon me with the weight of the desert sun. My journey along Route 66 hadn't been about history or discovery. It had been a confrontation with the ghosts I had tried so desperately to outrun, phantoms not of the road, but of my own making. As I drove on, the refracted lines of the desert finally settled, not in the landscape, but within the labyrinth of my own mind. The fear, I finally understood, had never been external. It had always resided within. And sometimes, the most desolate and terrifying roads are the ones we travel entirely alone. The Whispering Sands by Clara Bellwether. The Mojave at night is a canvas of profound and unsettling beauty. Years have passed since I last stood beneath that star-strewn abyss, yet the memory remains as vivid as the constellations themselves. We had driven for hours, David and I, seeking a solitude that now feels like a cruel irony. He, ever the eager astronomer, his telescope a gleaming sentinel against the inky blackness. Me, content with the simple comfort of a small fire, its flickering warmth a fragile defiance against the desert's chill embrace. The initial hours were filled with a comfortable intimacy, the kind that settles between two people who believe they have a lifetime stretching before them. Laughter mingled with the crackling of the flames, stories woven into the vast silence. But as the night deepened, a subtle shift occurred. The desert, initially welcoming in its quietude, began to feel immense, indifferent. The sheer number of stars, while breathtaking, also hinted at an incomprehensible vastness, a cosmic indifference that pricked at my sense of peace. A faint unease began to stir within me, a primal whisper suggesting that some silences are best left unbroken. Then it appeared, a pulsing light on the horizon, an anomaly in the familiar celestial tapestry. It wasn't the steady glow of a distant aircraft, nor the serene twinkle of a star. This light danced erratically, a living, breathing thing against the static backdrop of the cosmos. "Do you see that?" My voice, though soft, trembled slightly, a tremor that David, lost in his celestial observations, initially dismissed. "Probably just a plane, love," he'd said, his eyes still fixed on the heavens. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that it was no plane. It possessed an unnatural quality, a silent, shimmering sentience that sent a shiver tracing down my spine. The air around us seemed to thicken, to hum with a low, imperceptible vibration, a prelude to something unknown and unwelcome. As the light drew closer, David's scientific curiosity, a trait I had always admired, became a source of growing dread. "Let's check it out," he'd exclaimed, his eyes bright with an almost childlike wonder. "It could be something incredible." "We shouldn't," I'd pleaded, my voice tight with a fear I couldn't articulate. The desert suddenly felt like a forbidden space, a sanctuary we were foolishly trespassing. But David, ever the rationalist, the man who found explanations in equations and starlight, gently scoffed at my apprehension. "Come on, Sarah, what do you think it is? Little green men?" Reluctantly, my fear warring with the desire to stay close to him, I followed as he ventured towards the mesmerizing glow. Each step felt heavy, the sand seeming to cling to my boots. The air crackled with a faint static, and a wave of dizziness washed over me. Time itself seemed to warp, the seconds stretching into an eternity of mounting dread. "David, please stop." My voice was laced with a rising panic. He turned, his eyes already holding a distant, unfocused quality. "Can't you feel it, Sarah? This is extraordinary." I looked past him at the light that now pulsed with an almost unbearable intensity. The desert landscape behind it seemed to twist and distort, the shadows elongating into grotesque shapes. A low thrum vibrated through the ground, through my very bones. We were too close. Within the light, I saw flickers, indistinct shapes swirling like figures trapped in a vortex of darkness. "Sarah, look." David's voice was filled with an unsettling awe. But I saw not wonder, but desperation. The swirling shapes resolved into something horrifying, fleeting glimpses of faces contorted in agony, hands reaching out in silent supplication. A silent scream echoed in my mind. What if they're trapped?" I whispered, the realization dawning with terrifying clarity. David's forced laughter held a tremor of unease. "Trapped? You think it's aliens?" "Not aliens," I choked out. "Something worse. They can't escape." As the light pulsed closer, the grotesque shapes within became clearer. Twisted limbs, silent screams. "Make it stop. We need to go, David." But he stood transfixed, his camera clutched in his hand, lost in a macabre fascination. Then came the whispers. Faint at first, a murmuring that seemed to rise from the very sand beneath our feet, weaving through the desert silence with an ancient, unsettling rhythm. My vision blurred, the whispers morphing into a harrowing chant, promising release, promising safety. "Sarah," David whispered, his voice strangely distant. "Can you hear it?" Tears streamed down my face as I shook my head. "No, David, you don't understand. We have to run." But his eyes, glazed and vacant, betrayed him. The light pulsed, embracing him, wrapping around his every word. "Sarah, it's beautiful." As he took a step forward, a jolt, like an electric shock, ripped through the air. I stumbled backward, falling into the cold embrace of the desert night. David went silent. The light surged, engulfing him completely, and then he was gone, vanished without a trace. "David!" My scream tore through the silence, a desperate cry swallowed by the vast indifference of the desert. The stars flickered above, cold and distant. The haunting whispers faded, leaving only a profound, suffocating silence. I was alone. The fire dwindled, its dying embers reflecting the extinguishing of my own hope. I looked back towards the emptiness where the light had been, a void that seemed to swallow all reason and understanding. Panic clawed at my throat, and then I felt it. The watching. An unseen presence in the shadows, 1,000 unseen eyes reflecting my terror. The howls of distant coyotes echoed through the stillness, a mournful dirge for what was lost. Years later, the Mojave still haunts my dreams. The vastness, once a symbol of freedom, now feels like an endless prison. The stars, once a source of wonder for David, now seem like cold, indifferent witnesses. The whispers sometimes return in the dead of night, carried on the wind, a chilling reminder of the light and what it took. I am left with only questions, a gnawing guilt, and the crushing weight of a loss that defies explanation. What was that light? Where did David go? And why was I spared? The desert holds its secrets close, and I am forever bound to its silence. A survivor haunted not by ghosts of the past, but by the enduring mystery of a night when the stars looked down on a tragedy born of curiosity and an unknowable terror. The Stone Witnesses by Eleanor Ainsworth. The petrified forest stretched before me that day, a silent graveyard of ancient giants, their petrified forms stark against the ochre earth. As a geology student, I had come seeking the cold, hard facts of millennia past, the tangible evidence of a world transformed to stone. But from the moment I stepped onto that cracked, mineral-laden ground, a disquiet settled within me, a creeping unease that had nothing to do with scientific inquiry. The petrified trees, twisted into grotesque parodies of their former life, stood like silent sentinels, their shapes disturbingly human-like in their frozen agony. I'd shake my head, trying to dispel the fanciful notions that flickered at the edges of my mind, attributing the discomfort to the oppressive silence and the sheer age of the place. Days dissolved into a suffocating stillness, the only sound the whisper of the wind through the petrified branches. But as dusk bled across the landscape, the lengthening shadows seemed to animate the stone, twisting the familiar forms into something altogether more sinister. The trees appeared to shift in my peripheral vision, their silent watch taking on a palpable weight. I'd tell myself it was fatigue, the overactive imagination of a mind steeped in the deep time of geological epochs. Yet, each time I turned my back, The unsettling feeling of being observed intensified, a cold prickle on my skin. Sleep offered no respite. Vivid nightmares, sharp and unsettling, invaded my nights. I would awaken gasping, the image of the stone trees groaning, their petrified limbs contorting, reaching for me, pulling me down into the silent depths of their stony embrace. Each dream chipped away at my sense of reason, weaving a tapestry of fear that clung to me even in the harsh light of day. After one particularly restless night, a morbid curiosity overriding my growing apprehension, I ventured deeper into the forest than before. Armed with my flashlight and geological hammer, I traced the contours of the ancient rocks, seeking solace in their tangible reality. Then, I stumbled upon it. An unusual formation, strikingly different from the others. It resembled a human figure, twisted in what could only be described as agony, its petrified face frozen in a silent scream, a moment of terror captured for eternity in stone. A profound chill, colder than the desert night, ran through me. In the suffocating stillness I heard them, whispers, faint and indistinct, the murmurs of a time long past. Were the trees communicating? The thought was absurd, yet the feeling that permeated the air was undeniably sentient. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat, yet an irresistible urge to understand this petrified figure, to decipher its silent scream, drew me closer. As I approached, the whispers intensified, swirling around me like a phantom breeze. I reached out, my fingers trembling to touch the cold, unyielding surface. The moment my skin made contact, a surge of energy, cold and sharp, flooded my body. A visceral wave of despair washed over me, tearing through my mind, collapsing visions of loss and terror, of people trapped and calling out in anguish, their essence somehow entwined with the petrified forms around me. Panic, sharp and sudden, quivered in my chest. I stumbled back, horrified by the fleeting glimpses of a history I had no right to witness. This wasn't just stone. It felt alive, or at least imbued with the echoes of a profound suffering. In that instant, the unsettling feeling of being watched transformed into a terrifying certainty. The trees weren't merely observing, they were keeping watch over something terrible. Turning to flee, I found the familiar shadows of dusk, elongated and distorted, blocking my path. My senses heightened, I raced deeper into the petrified labyrinth, desperate to escape the oppressive atmosphere, the whispering now louder, almost demanding, taunting me with the weight of ancient pain. Then I stopped, frozen in place. A group of figures materialized before me, emerging from the deepening shadows, illuminated by the frantic beam of my flashlight. I recognized them with a jolt of pure terror. Students from my university who had vanished weeks before during their own research trip. They stood motionless, their eyes wide and vacant, their mouths silently forming a word I instinctively understood. Help us. Panic surged, a suffocating wave. I need to get out, I whispered, my body trembling uncontrollably. I darted past them, stumbling over petrified branches that snapped like brittle bones, the phantom figures trailing silently behind. The petrified trees themselves seemed to twist and bend, forming an impassable barrier, trapping me in a nightmare of stone and shadow. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I could hear a low groan echoing around me, as if the forest itself was alive and in pain. A profound vulnerability washed over me, stripping away my scientific knowledge, leading me to contend with forces far beyond my comprehension. Time seemed to warp, stretching and distorting like the ancient trees themselves. Finally, I reached the edge of the forest, gasping for breath, the cold night air a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere within. With each step away from the watchful trees, the whispers receded, but the vacant faces of my peers remained etched in my mind. What had I awakened? How many more souls were trapped within those stony forms? Back in town, my frantic account was met with disbelief, dismissed as the overactive imagination of a stressed student. People saw only ancient stones, remnants of a bygone era. But I knew differently. Each night, as dusk fell, I would find myself drawn to the edge of town, staring into the distant shadows, the petrified trees a silent, watchful presence on the horizon, their ancient secrets forever whispering in the wind. A part of me yearns to return, to understand, but the greater part fears the ancient energy of that place, a feeling that lingers, cold and persistent, like the touch of petrified stone. The Phantom Miles of 66 by Edgar Holloway. Route 66. Even the name hums with a certain romance, a nostalgic echo of open roads and bygone eras. I set out on it years ago, a young woman chasing a romantic notion of Americana, the endless ribbon of asphalt promising discovery and freedom. The sun beat down that day with a relentless intensity, baking the cracked earth on either side of the highway. Dust devils danced in the shimmering heat, swirling around the decaying husks of abandoned gas stations and crumbling motels, silent witnesses to a forgotten time. My old sedan, a faithful but temperamental beast, rumbled beneath me, its engine a steady counterpoint to the vast, empty silence. But even in that initial promise of open road, a subtle unease began to creep in. The heat seemed to distort the very air, the familiar landscape wavering and shimmering in unnatural ways. It was as if the desert itself was breathing, its exhalations creating mirages that tugged at the edges of my perception. The endless stretch of gray asphalt dividing the parched earth began to feel less like a path to freedom and more like a hypnotic line drawing me into an isolating void. A prickle of unease danced on my skin, a premonition that this journey into the heart of America might lead me to a darker, more personal reckoning. Hours dissolved into a monotonous blur. My mind, untethered by conversation or distraction, began to wander, drifting like the tumbleweeds that dotted the barren landscape. Then, I started seeing them, fleeting glimpses of figures in my peripheral vision, shadows that seemed to cling to the edges of the desolate scenery. Each time I turned my head for a clearer look, they vanished, leaving me alone with the hum of the engine and the growing weight of solitude. "Just the heat playing tricks," I'd muttered, a nervous laugh swallowed by the vast emptiness. But the feeling persisted, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. The highway itself seemed to shift and distort, familiar road signs replaced by fleeting images, straightaways inexplicably curving and then straightening again. The edges of my reality began to fray, like an old photograph losing its crispness. A sudden movement by the side of the road jolted me. A figure stood near the skeletal remains of an abandoned diner, a translucent silhouette shimmering in the heat haze. Startled, I slammed on the brakes, the sudden silence amplifying the frantic thumping of my heart. I hopped out, the hot wind tugging at my clothes, the silence pressing in, heavy and absolute. "Hello?" My voice was a thin, reedy sound, swallowed by the immensity of the desert. The diner's broken windows stared back like vacant eyes, reflecting my own growing fear. Graffiti, faded and peeling, seemed to scream of forgotten despair. Then I saw it, a distortion in the air beyond the shattered glass, something dark and indistinct, gesturing, beckoning. My heart pounded, but when I leaned closer, there was nothing. Only the faint, dusty scent of decay. Turning back to the car, a sense of urgency propelling me, I stepped onto the asphalt, and they were there again. The figures. But this time, they looked familiar, achingly so. Painful echoes from my past, faces of friends lost to time, to distance, to unspoken words. Each carried their own burden, their eyes reflecting a deep, abiding sorrow. Messages left unsaid flickered in their gaze, their mouths moving silently. Panic, cold and sharp, gripped me. Were these mere figments of my own guilt? Phantoms conjured by the solitude and the oppressive heat, or something more insistent? I scrambled back into the car, fumbling with the locks, the lowering sun casting long, distorted shadows that danced like malevolent spirits across the cracked asphalt. "Focus on the road," I told myself, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "Just keep driving." But the engine sputtered, the steering wheel feeling heavy, resistant. As I pressed the gas pedal, the world outside the windows seemed to warp, flashing images of twisted metal, screaming faces, the phantom stain of blood on the sun-baked highway. The solitude had curdled into a suffocating paranoia. I fought against the encroaching fear, but with each blink, the visions grew more vivid, more real. Then, the crackle of the radio shattered the oppressive silence. A low, sibilant voice whispered, barely audible, "Turn back, turn back." "What?" I shouted, a surge of defiance mixed with rising terror. But as I pressed forward, the landscape outside twisted into a grotesque parody of reality. The highway buckled and writhed, becoming a churning mass of despair. I saw them then, strewn across the phantom road, abandoned figures, their faces frozen in silent terror. I slammed on the brakes, a strangled scream tearing from my throat. Were they real? Or was my mind finally unraveling under the relentless pressure of the journey? The car lurched forward, the speedometer needle spinning wildly, time and space dissolving into a disorienting blur. Fragments of my past flashed before my eyes. Childhood memories, pivotal choices, the stark reckoning of paths taken and not taken. Then, darkness loomed, the sun swallowed by an unseen eclipse, leaving me driving blind into an abyss of my own making. A sense of something else, something hungry and malevolent, pressed in around me. I gripped the steering wheel, tears stinging my eyes. A voice, raspy and close, whispered from the shadows, "You can't escape us." I willed myself to wake, to break free from the encroaching nightmare. The highway dissolved beneath me, the silent screams of the fading figures echoing in the sudden stillness. Their cries were a chorus of regret and loss, ensnaring me in a web of my own making. I was alone. No one could save me from them, or from myself. Abruptly, the road returned, stretching endlessly towards an unseen end. As daylight reappeared, I was the lone occupant. I took a shuddering breath, the chilling realization settling upon me. The figures hadn't vanished. They had simply moved inward, manifesting within me, the echoes of their pain now a part of my own haunted landscape. My journey along Route 66 hadn't been about history or discovery. It had been a confrontation with the shadows I had tried so desperately to outrun. And as I drove on, the refracted lines of reality settled, not in the desert air, but within the fractured landscape of my own mind. The fear had always been within. Sometimes the longest, most desolate roads are the ones we travel entirely alone, carrying the ghosts of our past as our only companions. The Shadowed Shoreline by Alistair Finch. Lake Tahoe. Even the name evokes a sense of pristine beauty, a sapphire jewel nestled amongst the towering pines. Years have passed since I last walked its shadowed shores, but the memory of that autumn, the crisp bite in the air, the scent of pine and damp earth, remains as vivid as the haunting stillness that preceded the terror. I was a park ranger then, familiar with every twist and turn of the trails, the silent language of the woods. But even in that familiar embrace, a subtle unease began to take root, a prickling sensation that belied the apparent tranquility. My old dog Max, a loyal companion on countless patrols, was the first to sense it. We had walked that particular trail countless times, but that day a change came over him. He halted abruptly, his usual eager trot replaced by a stiff-legged stance, his ears perked, his eyes wide with a fear I couldn't comprehend. Kneeling beside him, I peered into his anxious gaze. "What is it, boy?" I'd whispered, but even as the words left my lips, a cold tendril of premonition snaked its way down my spine. I coaxed him forward, but his reluctance grew with each step deeper into the woods. An oppressive weight settled upon me, a feeling of being watched, scrutinized by unseen eyes that seemed to pierce the thickening shadows. Each time I turned, expecting to find a hiker, a deer, anything, there was only the silent, watchful presence of the trees. The local legends, tales whispered around crackling campfires, of a malevolent force rising from the lake's icy depths to claim wandering souls, flickered unbidden in my mind. I'd shake my head, dismissing them as folklore, the superstitious ramblings of mountain folk. But the faint whispers carried on the wind began with increasing frequency, incoherent at first, yet subtly, insidiously, tugging at the edges of my sanity. Days bled into weeks, a growing unease my constant companion. I documented the strange occurrences in my patrol log, a futile attempt to rationalize the irrational, to find a logical explanation for the oppressive atmosphere, the ever-watching shadows. But dread, a cold and persistent guest, lingered. One evening, I found Max cowering near a dense thicket, a low, guttural growl rumbling in his chest, his gaze fixed on the deepest, darkest coil of shadows. An instinct to retreat, to heed my dog's primal fear, warred with a morbid curiosity that tugged me closer. Pushing through the underbrush, I found it, a crude altar, constructed from weathered bones and smooth, gray stones, a stark testament to ancient, forgotten rites. And then the reflection in the still water beneath the altar. My own image, distorted, wavering, and then twisting, morphing into a face, ancient and contorted in a silent rage. I stumbled back, a cold panic seizing me, my breath catching in my throat. Max barked furiously now, a protective fury, pulling me away from the disturbing sight. We retreated to the familiar path, but that night, sleep offered no escape. The contorted face haunted my closed eyelids, and the whispers, now closer, more insistent, began to coalesce into words I could almost grasp, but not quite. Driven by an obsession I couldn't shake, I returned to the thicket, time after time, each visit intensifying the malevolence that clung to the air. But with each return to my cabin, the unseen presence grew bolder, stronger, its tendrils reaching beyond the shadowed woods. One night, I awoke to Max's frantic barking. The air in my small cabin felt charged, electric, heavy with something dark and ancient. Shadows flickered in the corners of my vision, and a profound chill enveloped me. It was no longer just the woods I feared, something had followed me home. I glanced at the door, half expecting to see it swing inward. Then a low voice, like the grinding of stones, echoed through the room, chilling me to the very marrow. "You brought me offerings." I turned to Max, who stood frozen, his gaze fixed on the deepest shadows. I felt trapped, helpless against the unseen force that now permeated my sanctuary. "No! Stay back!" I shouted, my hand reaching for the flashlight on the table, but the bulb flickered and died, plunging the cabin into an oppressive darkness. A quiet shuffling sound grew closer, and the whispers transformed, coalescing into words that slammed into me like a physical blow. "Join us. Become one with the depths." Panic surged, a desperate need to escape overwhelming me. I stumbled towards the window, my heart pounding against my ribs, urgency propelling me forward. But the reflection caught my eye. In the glass, shadows materialized, coalescing into indistinct figures emerging from the darkness behind me. I backed away, a strangled cry escaping my lips. Then the stillness shattered. The door creaked open and a figure stepped forward. An old woman, her skin ashen, her eyes hollow and black, her mouth twisting into a sinister smile. "Come, Javier," she beckoned, the whispers swirling around her like a malevolent chorus. "You've been chosen. It's what you seek." Max lunged, a desperate act of protection, breaking the spell momentarily, but I felt the pull, the irresistible weight of the lake calling to me. I fought against it, a primal scream tearing from my throat. "No." The woman's expression shifted, the sinister smile replaced by a cold fury. "You chose this path." I sprinted past her into the biting night, the trees clawing at me like skeletal fingers. Each step brought the haunted echo of the whispers, each breath a chilling reminder of the entity hunting me. I dashed towards the lake, the moonlight revealing its dark, still surface. I couldn't stop now. I had to escape, to find solace in its familiar vastness. But it was too late. The water bubbled, and faces, pale and contorted, rose from the depths, their silent demands echoing in my mind. The woman's chilling laughter echoed behind me, a final, horrifying symphony. I plunged into the icy water, desperately struggling to swim towards the distant shore, towards life. But the grip of the depths was too strong. I felt their cold, unseen fingers wrapping around me, dragging me down into the abyss. The last of my air escaped in a silent cry, swallowed by the darkness. Silence fell once more. Only ripples disturbed the glassy surface of the water, the lake settling as if nothing had happened. And I, the park ranger, who knew the woods so well, became another lost soul claimed by the shadowed shoreline, a chilling whisper carried on the wind, forever bound to the icy depths. The Painted Silence by Beatrice Albright. Salvation Mountain, even now, years after I fled its garish embrace, remains a vivid, unsettling tableau in my memory. The sun beat down with a relentless indifference that day, baking the cracked earth, yet the riotous colors of Leonard Knight's creation felt jarringly out of place, a superficial cheerfulness clinging to an underlying air of decay. I had gone there, young and foolishly convinced of my ability to unearth hidden truths, drawn by the whispers and legends that clung that bizarre, brightly painted hill in the middle of nowhere. I sought to understand the man, his fervent vision, and the strange shadows that seemed to cling to the edges of his vibrant testament. At first, the stories were the expected fare, tales of an eccentric artist, a testament to faith built from discarded scraps and fervent belief. The wind carried snippets of these stories through the transient community of Slab City, each whisper painting a picture of harmless, if unusual, devotion. But then, as I spent more time there, a darker undercurrent began to surface. Hushed conversations in the shadows of makeshift dwellings, glances that held a flicker of fear, veiled references to those who had come before, a religious community that had once called this desolate landscape home, and then vanished. Intrigued, perhaps morbidly so, I pressed further. I began to notice anomalies in the artwork itself. Strange, unsettling symbols woven into the cheerful murals, cryptic shapes that stirred a primal unease within me. They didn't align with night's known iconography, feeling older, somehow, hungrier. As dusk bled across the desert sky, the vibrant hues of the mountain deepened into ominous shadows, and the unsettling sensation of being watched intensified. It was a subtle pressure at first, a prickling at the back of my neck, but it grew with each passing hour. I remember approaching an old man, his face a roadmap of hardship etched by the desert sun, sitting silently outside a dilapidated trailer. He was the only resident who met my gaze directly, his eyes holding a weary knowing. "You know about the vanished ones, don't you?" I'd asked, my voice barely above a whisper, holding my breath for his response. He looked back at me, a profound sadness in his gaze. "Some things are better left buried, journalist." My youthful arrogance bristled. "I'm not afraid," I declared, desperate for the truth. "What happened to them?" He leaned closer, his voice a dry rustle. "They were taken. By forces you can't understand." Night descended, bringing with it a silence that felt heavy, expectant. The mountain loomed against the starlit sky, no longer a beacon of quirky faith, but an ominous silhouette, guarding untold secrets. Each step I took on its cracked surface felt like treading on something fragile, something broken. My flashlight beam danced nervously, and the darkness beyond its reach seemed to whisper. I discovered a narrow passage, concealed behind a layer of faded paint, leading into the mountain's claustrophobic interior. Strange symbols, the same unsettling shapes I'd seen on the outer walls, pulsed with an unnatural energy within the cramped tunnel. A cold dread coiled in my gut, but an irresistible, perhaps foolish curiosity compelled me onward. Inside, I found a small, crudely fashioned altar lined with faded photographs. The faces in the pictures, presumably the lost community, stared out with expressions of profound fear. In the dim light, I began to hear soft murmurs, a low, rhythmic chanting that felt ancient and sorrowful. Panic began to rise as I realized the voices echoed the hushed tones of the Slab City residents I had encountered. "Make it stop!" I'd cried out, but the whispers only intensified, a cacophony of sorrow and something darker, pressing in on my sanity. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows, a woman dressed in a faded white garment, her hair like wisps of fog. "You seek the truth," she said, her voice melodic yet laced with an undercurrent of something deeply wrong. "What happened to you?" I stammered, rooted to the spot by a terror that transcended logic. The whispers receded, but the cold grip of fear tightened around my heart. "We were chosen," she replied, her eyes piercing mine. "But chosen for what? You dig where you shouldn't." The ground beneath me trembled, a subtle vibration that spoke of something ancient and powerful stirring. "They disappeared, the community. What took them?" "They are held within these walls," she whispered, her voice sending shivers down my spine. "Not dead, not living. They are part of the mountain now, bound by their faith and the one who came after." A sickening realization washed over me. The stories, the symbols, they weren't a celebration of faith, but a warning, a desperate plea, a protection against something that had either latched onto Night's vision or had been there long before. Waiting. I turned to flee, but the darkness of the tunnel seemed to solidify, a suffocating presence. Panic flared as the voices of the lost community swelled around me, weaving themselves into the very fabric of my thoughts. "They know you seek, Marcus. They wait." Racing back through the narrow passage, the stench of despair clinging to the damp earth, the whispers turned into screams that clawed at my ears. "Flee while you can." Emerging from the mountain's womb, gasping for breath, I was met by a scene that shattered the last vestiges of my rational mind. The residents of Slab City stood in a silent circle, their eyes wide and vacant, all fixed on me as if I carried the stain of some terrible knowledge. The old man, his face now devoid of wariness, spoke with a chilling authority. "You should have listened," he said, stepping forward. Reality seemed to dissolve around me. There was no escape. I understood then. The mountain hadn't just been built. It had consumed. It had taken their faith, their souls, and twisted them into grotesque tapestry painted in vibrant, deceptive colors. As the whispers enveloped me, I felt myself fading, my own voice joining the chorus of the lost, becoming another echo trapped forever within the painted silence of Salvation Mountain. I ran that night, and I haven't stopped running since, but the painted silence still screams in my dreams. The Phantom Melody of Body by Silas Blackwood. Bodhi. Even now, decades later, the name conjures a landscape etched in shades of gray and the rust of forgotten dreams. I stepped into its abandoned streets that day, a younger man then, foolishly seeking the silence of a place where time itself seemed to have surrendered. The air hung heavy with the dust of ages, and the skeletal remains of buildings loomed like weary sentinels, each decaying structure whispering tales of a boomtown that had roared and then faded into an eerie stillness. I carried my audio equipment, eager to capture the ambient silence, the wind's mournful sigh through broken panes, the ghost of a town's voice. But even in that initial quiet, a disquiet settled upon me. The wind, as it snaked through the shattered windows, carried a chill that went beyond the desert air. It was a cold that seemed to seep from the very ground, a whisper of the town's troubled past, stories I'd half-heartedly researched, tales of families torn apart by hardship, of lives cut short, of children who had never truly left its desolate embrace. A prickling unease danced on my skin, a premonition that the silence I sought was perhaps not empty at all. Then it began. A soft melody, fragile and melancholic, drifted into my headphones. A piano tune, played with a hesitant tenderness that tugged at something deep within me. I halted, a wave of confusion washing over me. There was no piano in sight, no source for the sound in the desolate street. Yet the melody beckoned, pulling me deeper into the ghostly embrace of the town. I followed, stumbling over the uneven ground, my heart quickening with a mixture of curiosity and a growing, inexplicable apprehension. The music led me to an old schoolhouse, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin. The door creaked open at my touch, revealing a room frozen in time. Overturned desks lay scattered across the dusty floor, chalkboards still bearing the faint traces of long-forgotten lessons. An overwhelming sense of sadness, thick and cloying as the dust in the air pressed down on me. The piano music swelled, and then a chillingly sweet echo joined it, the faint, heart-wrenching strains of a child's lullaby. My breath hitched in my throat. "Who's there?" I called out, a foolish hope for a stray tourist or a misguided prankster clinging to my voice. Only the wind answered, its mournful sigh weaving through the phantom melody. My audio equipment flickered erratically, the screen jittering, static consuming the recording levels. Frustrated, I adjusted the dials, but it was useless. The sounds persisted, melodic and yet profoundly haunting. Suddenly, a voice, faint yet urgent, crackled through my headphones. "Help us!" A wave of icy despair washed over me, and a chilling certainty took root. The town wasn't empty. I felt unseen eyes upon me, a presence lurking just beyond the veil of the visible. I turned, ready to flee, but my feet felt leaden, a heavy dread anchoring me to the spot. Overhead, a fleeting shadow flitted across the weak light filtering through the cracked windows. I whipped my head up, my heart pounding. Nothing. Only the whispering wind and the persistent, chilling strains of the phantom lullaby. Instinct screamed for me to run, to escape the oppressive atmosphere, but a morbid curiosity, a foolish desire to understand, clawed at me. I stepped deeper into the schoolhouse. The sounds grew louder, more distinct, as if a fragment of the town's lost childhood was reaching out from the darkness, eager to share its sorrow. In the far corner, amidst the debris and decay, I found it, a broken piano, its ivory keys stained yellow with age and neglect. As I approached, the music halted abruptly, leaving a deafening silence that was more unsettling than any sound. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Something was profoundly wrong here. I knelt beside the silent instrument, my heart hammering against my ribs. Then came the laughter, soft, innocent, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. I stood abruptly, the sound spinning me around, my hand instinctively reaching for something solid. "Who's there?" My voice trembled, the bravado of a moment ago dissolving into a creeping desperation. "Play with us." The voice, childlike and yet laced with an ancient sorrow, drifted through the air. I felt a pull, an unseen hand beckoning me to sit, to join their silent vigil. I hesitated, the weight of the town's tragic history crashing down upon me. I remembered the stories of the lost children, their spirits said to be bound to this place by grief and unfinished lives. With a shaky breath, I seated myself at the broken piano, my fingers hovering over the yellowed keys. The moment I pressed down, the air in the room thickened, the silence replaced by a palpable energy. The melody returned, flooding my senses with an overwhelming wave of sorrow. The room seemed to swirl, the walls pulsing with an unseen light. The laughter grew, echoing off the dusty walls, circling me like an invisible embrace. And then I saw them. Shadowy figures of children, their faces pale and indistinct, their wide eyes fixed on me. They danced around me, a silent, ethereal waltz, their small hands reaching out as if begging me to join their endless sorrow. Panic surged, a cold fist clenching around my heart. I slammed my hands against the keys, a discordant crash that ripped through the phantom melody. Silence engulfed the room once more. The children vanished, leaving only the lingering echo of their laughter. My audio equipment clicked back on, recording only the frantic pounding of my own heart, my own trembling voice asking into the silence, "What do you want?" The reply, when it came, was a chilling whisper in my headphones. "Play with us, forever." Terror seized me. I bolted from the schoolhouse, my footsteps pounding against the cracked earth. As I ran through the deserted streets, the sounds returned, a cacophony of children's cries, haunting and relentless, reverberating off the decaying buildings. I stumbled towards my car, gasping for air, the oppressive atmosphere of body clinging to me like a shroud. With every step, the ground beneath my feet felt unsteady, the shadows lengthening and twisting into grotesque shapes. Desperation clawed at me, my breath quickening, my vision blurring. As I crossed the threshold of the town, I glanced back one last time. The children stood in the doorway of the schoolhouse, their faces twisted in an eternal sorrow, their wide eyes pleading, "Play with us." I slammed the car door shut, my lungs burning, my heart racing. Body faded in the rearview mirror, but the phantom melody remained, entwining itself in the deepest recesses of my mind, a haunting, inescapable reminder. Did I leave them behind in that ghost town? Or had Bodhi claimed a piece of me forever, its phantom music an eternal echo in my soul? The silence of that place is a lie, and the music will never truly fade. The Iron Echoes by Silas Blackwood, Alcatraz. Even the name itself carries a weight, a resonance of despair that lingers in the air like the perpetual dampness of its stone walls. Years have passed since my last shift within its crumbling embrace. Years I've spent trying to silence the echoes that still reverberate in the hollow chambers of my mind. I was a park ranger then, young and perhaps foolishly pragmatic, tasked with guarding the ghosts of others while remaining blind to the ones that would eventually claim a part of me. The wind, howling through the broken panes and along the desolate corridors, was a constant lament, a mournful counterpoint to the rhythmic pulse of the distant foghorn, a sound that spoke of isolation and the endless expanse of the bay. I dismissed the stories, of course, the whispers of tormented souls, the fleeting shadows glimpsed in the periphery, the sudden drops in temperature, all relegated to the realm of folklore, the overactive imaginations of tourists, and the lonely musings of night watchmen. Just shadows, I'd often mutter to myself, the sounds swallowed by the oppressive silence, rubbing the perpetual fatigue from my eyes. The long night shifts blurred into a monotonous routine, the chill of the stones seeping into my bones, a tangible manifestation of the prison's grim history. But then, the shadows began to possess a life of their own. At first, they were mere flickers at the edge of my vision, darting into the unlit corners of cells, stretching and receding along the damp walls like phantom candle flames. I'd attribute it to exhaustion, the tricks my weary eyes playing in the dim light. Yet the unease in my gut grew, a cold knot tightening with each step deeper into the labyrinthine cell blocks. Cell 14, infamous for the brutal history it held, always felt different. A palpable weight hung in the air, a residual echo of the violence that had stained its stone. The moment I stepped into Cell 14 that night, a rush of icy air filled my lungs, a suffocating embrace that sent a shiver through me. And then, the footsteps. Faint, almost imperceptible at first, but undeniably there. A soft, rhythmic pacing just outside the cell, as if an unseen resident was restlessly traversing the narrow corridor. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat, in the suffocating silence. The beam of my flashlight, usually a comforting presence, now flickered erratically, casting elongated, dancing shadows that seemed to mock my skepticism. "Hello?" My voice cracked, the sound swallowed by the oppressive darkness. A foolish instinct, a desperate yearning for a rational explanation to quell the rising dread. A faint sound like dry leaves rustling across stone. A whisper, "Get out." The words, barely audible, chilled me to the bone, a cold tendril wrapping around my heart. I laughed nervously, a hollow sound that echoed in the confined space. "All right, I get it. Long night, tired." But as I turned to leave, I felt it. A presence, an undeniable weight of unseen eyes boring into me, suffocating and heavy. I glanced back at the empty cell, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. Yet the whispers intensified, not in the air, but in the echoing chambers of my own mind. I hurried through the dimly lit corridors, seeking the false comfort of the fluorescent glow in the main hall, a sterile light that momentarily banished the clinging cold. But even there, the feeling of being watched persisted, a constant awareness of unseen eyes. Later, as the fog rolled in from the bay, a thick spectral blanket that swallowed the outside world, a loud bang echoed through the prison, the iron doors groaning as if in protest. Did anyone else hear that? I called into my radio, my voice tight with a fear I could no longer deny. Only static answered, a cold, indifferent hiss. Trapped by the fog, the sheer isolation of the empty cells and winding corridors pressed in on me. "Stop it!" I'd shouted into the echoing silence, annoyance a thin veil over the rising terror. Slam! A cell door crashed shut behind me, the sound resonating deep within the stone. My feet moved against my will, drawn back towards the unsettling sounds, the darkness seeming to beckon. The temperature plummeted as I approached the old mess hall, a place steeped in the prison's grim history, where whispers of lingering torment clung to the air. Inside, shadows danced with an unnatural fluidity along the walls, and the whispers morphed into anguished cries, scratching at the edges of my hearing. But my skepticism, a stubborn shield against the encroaching fear, held firm. "You're not real," I hissed into the darkness, my voice trembling despite my defiance. Then a figure coalesced from the penumbral edge. Tall, gaunt, dressed in tattered rags, its hollow eyes seeming to absorb the very light around it. Every instinct screamed for me to flee, but a morbid fascination held me rooted to the spot. "Help me!" the ghostly figure croaked, a skeletal hand reaching out. It was the voice from the radio, the voice of desperation. And as it spoke, others began to materialize, shadowy figures of men, their faces twisted in silent despair. They surrounded me, their hollow gazes boring into my soul, the atmosphere thickening, suffocating me with their silent screams. "Your turn," they whispered in unison, their voices a cacophony of torment echoing within the cold stone walls. Panic surged, a tidal wave threatening to drown me. The footsteps returned, now uneven and frantic, echoing my own terror. I stumbled backward, clawing at my throat, gasping for breath. The shadows surged closer, their touch icy and unyielding. In a final act of desperation, I turned and ran, the corridors twisting into a nightmarish labyrinth, leading me deeper into the prison's spectral embrace. I burst through the heavy iron door, stumbling out into the crisp night air, but the distant foghorn, its mournful bellow echoing across the bay, felt like a final farewell. In the cold, indifferent light, Alcatraz loomed behind me, silent once more. Only the whispers remained, clinging to the darkness, a chilling reminder of what I had seen, what I had felt, and a part of me, I fear, never truly left. The iron echoes of Alcatraz still resonate within me, a constant reminder of the night the shadows found their voice. The Echoes on the Embankment by Elias Thorne. It's been years now, a span long enough for the sharp edges of grief to soften, replaced by the dull ache of perpetual absence. Yet, certain memories remain stubbornly vivid, etched into the fabric of my mind like scars on old wood. The drive down Highway 1 that late autumn evening is one such memory, a tapestry woven with the threads of beauty and terror, forever stained by what came after. The California coast that day was breathtaking, a canvas of fiery oranges and bruised purples as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air, thick with the salty tang of the Pacific, carried the cries of distant gulls. I was young then, impetuous, chasing the last vestiges of summer with a solo road trip down to Big Sur. The winding road, clinging precariously to the cliffs, offered vistas that stole your breath away, each turn revealing a new, dramatic panorama. But as twilight deepened, a subtle shift occurred. The beauty began to feel oppressive, the vastness of the ocean and the towering cliffs morphing into something isolating, almost menacing. A low fog began to snake its way inland, tendrils creeping across the asphalt like ghostly fingers. My headlights cut twin tunnels through the thickening mist, amplifying the feeling of being adrift in a world slowly dissolving around me. A disquiet settled in my stomach, an intuition whispering that the raw power of this landscape held secrets best left undisturbed. Then I saw her. A figure huddled by the roadside just past the dramatic curve near Bixby Bridge. Her face was pale in the gloom, an ethereal contrast to the encroaching darkness. There was a vulnerability in her posture, a silent plea in the way she held herself. Against my better judgment, a wave of pity overriding the growing unease, I pulled over. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely a whisper, thin and fragile as spun glass. Monterey, she'd murmured, her eyes wide and shadowed, reflecting a light I couldn't quite place. The moment she was inside, a profound cold permeated the car, a chill that seemed to seep from her very being. She spoke of a feeling, a presence clinging to the road ahead. "The turn," she'd breathed, her gaze fixed on the swirling fog beyond the windshield. It remembers." Her words, cryptic and unsettling, hung in the air. She spoke of an accident, a sorrow woven into the very fabric of that stretch of highway. A shiver traced its way down my spine, a prickling sensation that had nothing to do with the temperature. Yet there was a desperate quality to her, fragility that made me press on, a foolish desire to offer some small measure of solace. As we approached the infamous hairpin turn, the air grew heavy, charged with an almost palpable tension. The fog had become a suffocating shroud, the roar of the ocean a mournful lament below. "Slow down," she'd urged, her voice laced with a growing panic. "Please, you have to slow down." My knuckles were white as I gripped the steering wheel, my gaze fixed on the treacherous curve ahead. I glanced in the rearview mirror, a fleeting impulse, and found only the empty space of the back seat. She was gone, vanished into the swirling mist as if she'd never been there at all. The screech of tires, the sickening lurch as my car fought for purchase on the slick asphalt, these sounds are forever etched in my memory. I narrowly avoided plunging over the cliff's edge, the abyss yawning just inches from my wheels. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, chilling silence. I stumbled out of the car, the fog a tangible presence, swirling and whispering around me. The ocean's roar seemed to mock my disorientation. I called out, my voice swallowed by the mist, a foolish attempt to find an explanation in the emptiness. Later, the fragmented news reports pieced together a horrifying truth. A fatal accident years prior, at that very turn. A young woman, lost. The details, they resonated with a chilling familiarity. The pale complexion, the shadowed eyes. But was it a trick of the light, a manifestation of my own frayed nerves? The metallic scent that lingered in the air, the sudden, inexplicable cold, they defied logic yet felt undeniably real. I drove away that night, leaving a part of myself behind in that fog-shrouded stretch of highway. The landscape project was forgotten, the beauty of the coast now tainted by an undercurrent of dread. Sleep offered no escape, my dreams haunted by fleeting images, whispers carried on the wind. The questions remained, unanswered and unsettling. Who was she? What was the accident she spoke of? Was she a figment of my imagination, a product of stress and the eerie atmosphere? Or had I encountered something else? Years have passed, but the memory of that night remains a raw wound. The fragility of life, the suddenness with which it can be extinguished, these are lessons etched in the deepest parts of my soul. The guilt lingers, a persistent shadow. Could I have done something differently? Should I have heeded the unease that gnawed at me from the start? The highway still winds along the coast, the ocean still crashes against the cliffs, but for me, that stretch of road will forever be haunted. Not by ghosts of the deceased, perhaps, but by the enduring power of memory, the weight of unanswered questions, and the chilling reminder of a night when the veil between worlds felt terrifyingly thin. The Frozen Echoes of Donner Pass by Jasper Thorne. The snow fell that night with a silent, predatory hunger. Each flake a tiny shard of ice, clinging to the windshield of my rig like a ghostly embrace. Years have passed since that ill-fated run through Donner Pass. Years I've spent trying to outrun the icy tendrils of memory, but the oppressive silence of that blizzard, the way it seemed to suffocate the very air, remains a chilling constant. I'd traversed that route countless times, the familiar curves and inclines etched into my muscle memory, but that night held a different weight, a palpable sense of foreboding that settled heavy in my chest. The usual hum of the engine seemed muted, swallowed by a deeper, more unsettling quiet. Then, the crackle of the CB radio shattered the oppressive stillness. At first, it was just static, a sporadic hiss that I instinctively dismissed as interference, the capricious whims of the mountain air. But then, a voice, thin and wavering, pierced through the white noise. "Help me, please!" My heart lurched, a sudden sharp thud against my ribs. I leaned closer to the speaker, turning up the volume, the faint plea shimmering in and out like a dying ember, punctuated by what sounded like muffled weeping. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, the unease solidifying into something akin to dread. "Is anyone out there?" I'd called into the mic, my voice tight, but only the howling wind answered. I passed the historical marker, its snow-laden plaque barely visible in the swirling white. The air around it felt colder, heavier, thick with the sorrowful tales of the Donner Party. I knew their story, the pioneers trapped by the merciless winter, their desperation leading to unimaginable acts. That history hung in the air like a shroud, a palpable sense of suffering clinging to the icy landscape. A shiver, unrelated to the temperature, traced its way down my spine. I pressed on, trying to rationalize the voice on the radio, to dismiss it as a trick of the atmosphere, a product of fatigue and the pass's grim legacy. But then it came again, clearer this time, laced with a desperate urgency. "Help. Me? They're here. We can't." My stomach churned with a cold dread. A connection, visceral and unsettling, bloomed within me. Who was this woman? A stranded traveler? Or something else? "Is someone there? Who are you?" The question felt foolish, a desperate plea into the void, but the fear gnawing at me demanded an answer. The reply, when it came, washed over me like a glacial wave. "They took the children." I couldn't shake the image that those words conjured, the raw terror that resonated in that broken voice. Then a flicker of movement caught my eye through the swirling snow. A figure stood beside the road, pale and indistinct, shrouded in the blizzard's white embrace. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was it real? A hallucination born of exhaustion and the desolate landscape, or a cruel trick of the relentless storm? I hesitated, a battle raging between my ingrained instinct to help and a primal fear that whispered of unseen dangers. Ultimately, the ingrained code of the road won. If someone was out there in that unforgiving wilderness, I couldn't leave them. "Hello?" My voice trembled, swallowed by the howling wind. The figure turned, and I saw them, eyes like empty voids, yet intensely watchful, staring back at me from a gaunt, ghostly face framed by tattered clothing. And behind her, shadows. Small, indistinct shapes that could only be children, faceless and silent, yet radiating an aura of profound sorrow. A cold that went beyond the winter chill seeped into my bones. Suddenly, the radio shrieked to life with an anguished wail. "Help us." The shadows behind the woman began to move slowly, reaching out with elongated skeletal fingers. Panic, raw and visceral, surged through me. I can't help you," I screamed, slamming my foot on the accelerator, the truck fishtailing wildly as I careened away, the figure and the spectral children fading into the swirling white behind me. But the voice didn't leave me. It echoed in the hollow chambers of my mind, twisting my thoughts into a knot of fear and guilt. "We are lost, forever. Fate or fate abandoned." I pushed the truck through the blizzard's fury, but their cries clung to me, icy chains binding me to their unseen suffering. It became unbearable as I approached the next historical marker, the disembodied whispers echoing in my head. "Save us." And then, fleeting glimpses through the snow, sorrowful faces, silent mouths moving in unison. Then, a glimmer of headlights through the white. Another truck. A wave of desperate relief washed over me. I grabbed the radio, my hand shaking, desperate to warn the other driver. "This is Emily on Channel 19. There's something wrong in the pass. You're not alone." Silence. Then a crackle, but it wasn't a voice, just static, mocking my desperate plea. The other truck drew nearer, its headlights cutting through the storm like twin beacons. And then, the blaring horn. My heart leaped into my throat as I swerved, a futile attempt to avoid the inevitable. The trucks collided in a deafening cacophony of metal and shattering glass. Darkness swallowed me whole. When I awoke, I was back in my truck. The storm had inexplicably stopped, the world outside eerily still under a sky beginning to lighten with the false dawn. I rubbed my aching head, confusion swirling in my mind. The CB radio crackled softly, and I reached for it, my breath catching in my throat. "Help us, please." My heart sank, a cold weight in my chest. I fumbled with the door latch and stumbled out into the crisp, biting air. The road was empty. No other truck, no signs of life, just a vast, frozen expanse stretching into the pale light. Above, the stars twinkled with an indifferent brilliance. And then I saw them, the shadows lingering near the twisted wreckage of my own truck. The faceless children, their whispers now a soft, mournful melody. "Help us. We are lost." I stumbled back, terror, a physical presence gripping my heart. The past had reached out, and I had become a part of its frozen sorrow. I had become another whisper in the wind, forever trapped among the shadows of the forgotten. The road remained silent, save for the mournful howl of the wind, an endless echo of despair in the desolate pass.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.